Eliza wanted to say no, wanted to tell him to take his pity and his loaded wagon and ride them both into the mountains until the snow buried everything. Wanted to prove that she could handle this, that Thomas's death hadn't broken her, that she was enough. But Samuel's face rose in her mind, the way he'd started asking if she was hungry instead of saying he was, the way his shirts hung looser every week. "One load," she heard herself say, "and you tell anyone it's trade, not charity." He retreated, but slowly, looking back over his shoulder at the wagon like it might disappear if he looked away. Creed watched the boy go, something shifting in his expression. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "How long since he's had a full belly?" "That's none of—" He clicked to the horses, and the wagon started moving. Eliza watched him go, this stranger who shared her last name and had shown her more kindness in an afternoon than her own town had in 3 months. "Ma?" Samuel tugged at her sleeve. "Why'd you tell him to go?" "Because we don't need anybody, honey. Just you and me." "But he was nice." "I know." "And we got food now." "I know." "So why—" "Because sometimes people leave anyway, Samuel. Better to send them off on your own terms than wait for them to decide you're not worth staying for." She said it quietly, but not quietly enough. When she looked down, Samuel was staring at her with eyes too old for 6. "Dad didn't leave on purpose," he said. "I know, baby." "He wouldn't have. Not ever." "I know, but she guided him inside anyway, before the tears could come. And they ate bacon that night for the first time in months, and it tasted like grief and gratitude mixed together until she couldn't tell which was which." Ticked. The next morning brought frost thick enough to paint the world white. Eliza woke before dawn, habit more than need, and lay in bed listening to Samuel's breathing from the other room. Even, steady, peaceful. A sound she'd been afraid she might lose. The supplies Creed had brought would last a month if she was careful, maybe 6 weeks if she stretched them. Enough to get through the worst of winter. Enough to give her time to figure out what came next. She rose, dressed in the dark, and built up the fire. The cabin was cold enough to see her breath, but it would warm soon. Coffee, real coffee, was already a memory worth savoring. Outside, the world was silent under its coat of frost. The creek ran black against white banks, steam rising where the water fought against cold. Beautiful, if you could forget it was trying to kill you. Eliza was filling the coffee pot when she heard it, the sound of an axe biting wood. She froze. The sound came again, rhythmic and sure from the direction of the woodpile. "Samuel?" she called, keeping her voice low. "Stay inside." She grabbed Thomas's old rifle from beside the door, unloaded, but whoever was chopping wood didn't need to know that, and stepped onto the porch. Rowan Creed was at the woodpile, splitting logs with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times before. He'd already built a substantial stack, and the pile of unsplit rounds was noticeably smaller. Eliza's hands tightened on the rifle. "You're still here." Creed sunk the axe into the chopping block and turned to face her. His breath plumed in the cold air. "Appears so." "I told you to leave." "I know." He picked up an armload of split wood. "Figured I'd get some work done first." "That wasn't the agreement." "Agreement was 1 load, then I'm gone. Didn't specify when. Don't parse words with me, Mr. Creed." "Wouldn't dream of it." He walked past her toward the cabin, arms full of firewood. "Just figured your woodpile could use attention. Winter's coming hard." "I can split my own wood. Can you?" He nodded toward the axe. "Because that blade's duller than sermon on Sunday, and your technique's going to cost you a finger before Christmas." Heat flooded her face, anger mixed with embarrassment. "I've been doing fine. You've been surviving. There's a difference." He set the wood down by the door, close enough that she could smell the pine sap and morning frost on him. "Look, I know you want me gone. I'll go. But let me sharpen your tools first. Check your roof. Make sure your chimney's not going to catch fire in the middle of January." "I don't need help." "Yeah, that's real clear." His voice stayed level, but something harder edged into it now. "But here's the thing, Mrs. Rowan. I spent last night in your barn because the boarding house in town was full and I wasn't about to waste money on the saloon. And lying there in the dark, I heard your roof creaking in the wind. I heard your chimney struggling to draw. I heard all the little sounds of a place that's trying real hard to hold together and might not make it through winter. Eliza's jaw clenched. My barn is not. I paid for it. He said it flatly, no room for argument. Left $2 under the water bucket. That's more than fair for one night's shelter. And this morning, I'm paying for breakfast with labor. Sharpen your tools, patch your roof, clean your chimney. Then I'll go and you can get back to handling everything yourself. I didn't invite you to breakfast. You didn't invite me to do a lot of things. Hasn't stopped them from needing doing. They stared at each other, frost breath mingling in the space between them. From inside the cabin, Samuel called out, Ma, who's that? Nobody, Eliza called back. The man from yesterday isn't nobody, Samuel said, appearing in the doorway. Hi, mister. He paused, then his face lit up. Mr. Rowan. Like Ma. That's Creed, Eliza said sharply. Mr. Creed. But you said his name was Rowan. That's his first name. His last name is Creed. Samuel's face scrunched up in confusion. That's backwards. Yes, Creed said, and there was humor in his voice again, warm as the coffee Eliza could smell brewing inside. Yes, it is. Why? Samuel, inside. Now. But Ma. Now. The boy retreated, but slowly, looking between them like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. When they were alone again, Eliza lowered the rifle. Not because she'd decided to trust Creed, but because holding it while he stood there unarmed made her feel ridiculous. One day, she said, Ma'am, you can stay one day, do whatever work you think needs doing, then you leave and you don't come back. Understand? Yes, ma'am. And you sleep in the barn, not the cabin. Wasn't planning otherwise. And you don't... She paused, trying to find the right words. You don't make promises to my son. Don't make him think you're staying. He's lost enough. Something shifted in Creed's expression, something that looked like understanding wrapped around old pain. I won't. I mean it. I know. Eliza wanted to say more, wanted to explain all the reasons why letting him stay even one more day was a mistake. But the coffee was ready, and her roof was creaking, and Samuel was watching from the window with hope in his eyes that she didn't have the heart to crush twice in 2 days. There's coffee, she said instead, if you want it. I'd appreciate that. She turned to go inside, then paused. And Mr. Creed? Ma'am? Thank you. For the supplies. I should have said that yesterday. You did, just not in words. She left him there and went inside, where Samuel was practically vibrating with questions she didn't have answers for. Creed worked through the morning with the steady focus of someone who'd learned that most problems came down to attention to detail. He sharpened the axe first, then the saw, then the knife she used for everything from cutting rope to preparing what little meat they had. The whetstone sang against steel, a sound that carried across the frost-still air. From the cabin, Eliza watched while pretending not to. She'd set Samuel to his letters, but the boy kept drifting to the window, fascinated by the stranger who moved through chores like water flowing downhill. Inevitable, efficient, unstoppable. Is he going to stay? Samuel asked for the third time. No. But he's working real hard. That doesn't mean he's staying. Why not? Because people don't stay, Samuel. They do what they need to do, and then they move on. That's how the world works. Dad stayed. The words hit like a fist. Eliza set down the bread dough she'd been kneading, made possible by Creed's flour, and looked at her son. Your father stayed because he loved us, she said quietly. Because this was his home, his family, his dream. Mr. Creed is a stranger who's passing through. There's a difference. But what if? No what ifs. He's leaving tomorrow. End of discussion. Samuel returned to his letters, but his heart wasn't in it. Neither was hers. By noon, Creed had finished with the tools and moved on to the roof. Eliza heard him up there, the sound of hammer against shingle, loose boards being secured. He worked without stopping, without complaint, and when she brought him water at midday, he drank it down and handed back the cup with a nod that managed to be both grateful and matter-of-fact. Chimney's next, he said. Needs a good cleaning before it becomes a fire hazard. I've been meaning to do that. Meaning to and doing are different things. I know that. Do you? He studied her and there was no judgment in it, just curiosity. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been so busy trying to prove you don't need help that you've stopped asking for it, even when you do. I don't need a lecture from a stranger. No, you need a clean chimney and a patched roof and about 6 more hours in every day. But a lecture is what you're getting because someone needs to say it. There's no prize for doing this alone, Mrs. Rowan. Your husband's already dead. You don't have to prove you're strong enough to follow him. The words should have been cruel. Instead, they felt like permission. Eliza looked away, blinking against the sting in her eyes that had nothing to do with the wind. You don't know anything about me. I know you're tired. I know you're scared. I know you love your son enough to swallow your pride and accept help from a stranger, which is harder than most people think. He paused. And I know that whatever you're running from, whether it's grief or failure or just the memory of what you used to have, it's going to catch you eventually. Might as well stop running and face it while you've still got the strength. Is that what you did? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Stopped running? Creed's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went distant. No, he said simply. That's how I know it doesn't work. He climbed back onto the roof, and Eliza stood there with the empty water cup, watching a man who was either the answer to a prayer she hadn't prayed or a new kind of problem she couldn't afford. The day wore on. Creed cleaned the chimney, using brushes and rods he'd brought from his wagon like he'd been planning this all along. Soot came down in black clouds, filling the cabin with the smell of old fires and new possibilities. Eliza cooked while he worked. Actual food, not the thin soups and watered-down porridge they'd been surviving on. Beans with bacon, cornbread made with real meal, coffee that didn't taste like punishment. Samuel helped, chattering about school and friends and the horse he wanted when he grew up. Small talk that felt like a glimpse of the boy he'd been before hunger made him quiet. When the work was done, Creed came to the door, black with soot and exhaustion. Chimney's clear, he reported. Should draw clean now, and your roof's patched. Won't hold forever, but it'll get you through winter. Thank you. Just trade. But he smiled when he said it, small and quick. You should wash up, Eliza said, surprising herself. There's hot water on the stove, and dinner if you want it. I don't want to impose. You've been imposing all day. Might as well finish the job. This time his smile reached his eyes. Yes, ma'am. He washed at the pump, stripping to the waist in the cold November air, and Eliza absolutely did not watch from the window while he scrubbed soot from skin that spoke of a life lived hard and survived harder. She did not notice the scars, or the way his shoulders moved, or the care he took in cleaning himself despite the cold. She did not notice any of that. When he came inside, dressed and clean and smelling like lye soap, Samuel insisted he sit in the good chair, Thomas's chair, though neither of them said it. Eliza served dinner and they ate in silence for a while. The only sounds, the scrape of spoons against bowls and the pop of the freshly cleaned fire. This is good, Creed said eventually. Best meal I've had in months. It's just beans. It's company. That's rarer than beans. Samuel piped up then, full of questions about where Creed had been, what he'd seen, why he was heading into the mountains in winter. Creed answered carefully, telling stories that felt true but incomplete. Work in Colorado mines, trouble with a foreman, a decision to move on before moving on became mandatory. Are you running from the law? Samuel asked, eyes wide. Samuel, Eliza snapped, but Creed just laughed. No, son, I'm running for myself. But the law's fine with me as far as I know. What's the difference? The law can catch you. Yourself, you carry with you wherever you go. It was dark by the time dinner ended. Creed helped clean up despite Eliza's protests, then gathered his things to head to the barn. At the door, he paused. Thank you for the meal and the hospitality. Thank you for the work. Just trade. Stop saying that. Stop believing it's charity. They stood there, close enough to touch, not touching. Outside, the first snow of the season was starting to fall, fat flakes that caught the light from the cabin and turned the world into something soft and temporary. Mr. Creed, Eliza said. Ma'am? Why are you really here? He thought about it for a long moment, watching the snow. Because when I heard Morrison turn you away, I remembered being the one turned away, he said finally. And I remembered how it felt. And I thought, just once, I'd like to be the one who helps instead of the one who needs it. That's not a good enough reason to go this far out of your way. Maybe not, but it's the only one I've got. He touched the brim of his hat and walked out into the snow, a dark figure against white, heading for the barn and whatever dreams or demons waited there. Eliza closed the door and leaned against it, listening to Samuel get ready for bed, feeling the warmth of the fire and the weight of the day settling into her bones. Tomorrow, Creed would leave. Tomorrow things would go back to normal. Her and Samuel, alone against the winter, surviving. Tomorrow. But tonight, her pantry was full. Her roof was patched. Her chimney drew clean, and for the first time since Thomas died, the cabin felt like it might actually protect them from what was coming. It wasn't hope. She wouldn't call it that. But it was something, and something, after months of nothing, felt like everything. Morning came with the kind of silence that meant fresh snow. Eliza woke to it, that particular quality of quiet that only happened when the world had been buried overnight. She lay still for a moment, listening for Samuel's breathing from the other room, for the crackle of the fire that should have died hours ago. The fire was still going. She sat up fast enough to make her head spin. Through the window, she could see maybe 6 inches of new snow, still falling in thick curtains that turned the mountains into ghosts, and smoke rising from the chimney in a steady column that meant someone had been feeding the fire. Eliza pulled on her shawl and went to the door. Her boots were where she'd left them, but next to them sat a neat pile of kindling and a bucket of water, fresh enough that steam still rose from the surface. "Damn it," she muttered. She found Creed at the woodpile again, working in the falling snow like weather was something that happened to other people. He'd already split enough wood to last a week, and the pile was growing. "You were supposed to leave," she called out. He sunk the axe and turned, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Couldn't." "Why not?" "Storm." He gestured at the white world around them. "Can't see 3 feet in any direction. Would be stupid to travel in this. So you decided to split wood instead." Couldn't sleep seemed productive. Eliza crossed her arms against the cold. She was still in her nightdress under the shawl, her feet already going numb in boots she hadn't bothered to lace. "The storm will pass." "Probably." "Then you'll leave." "If that's what you want?" "It is." "All right." He picked up the axe again. "Soon as it's safe to travel." She should have gone back inside. Should have left him to his work and the cold. Instead, she heard herself asking, "Did you sleep at all?" "Some." "Barn's not warm." "I've had worse." "That's not an answer." He paused, axe halfway to the next log. "No, ma'am." "I suppose it's not." They looked at each other across the snow, and Eliza realized she was standing outside in a storm arguing with a man about whether he'd slept poorly in her barn. It was possibly the most ridiculous thing she'd done since accepting his help in the first place. "There's coffee," she said, "when you're done trying to freeze to death." "Appreciate it." She went back inside, where Samuel was awake and pressed against the window, watching Creed work. "He's still here," the boy said, wonder in his voice. "Storm kept him." "But he's still here. For now. Maybe he'll stay." "Samuel, sit." I know. People leave." He turned from the window, and the resignation in his 6-year-old face made her chest ache. "But maybe he's different." "He's not." "How do you know?" "Because I'm your mother, and I know things." Dad used to say that, then you'd both be wrong about something and laugh about it. The memory hit sharp enough to hurt. Thomas claiming he knew the creek would flood, her saying it wouldn't, both of them ending up soaked and laughing like fools. Back when being wrong together was just another way of being happy. "Your father and I were wrong about a lot of things," Eliza said quietly. "But not about this. Mr. Creed is passing through, that's all." Samuel didn't argue, but he didn't look convinced either. He just went back to the window, watching the stranger who might be different, probably wasn't, but could be. Eliza made breakfast while the snow fell and Creed worked and the fire burned with wood he'd cut. Oatmeal with real sugar this time, thanks to supplies she hadn't earned. The unfairness of it sat heavy in her stomach. When Creed finally came in, he was covered in snow and moving with the careful stiffness of someone who'd pushed past cold into the place where cold became dangerous. "Jesus, you're half frozen," Eliza said before she could stop herself. "I'm fine." "You're blue. Sit by the fire." "Mrs. Rowan, sit down." The command came out sharper than she'd intended, but it worked. Creed sat, and she brought him coffee and oatmeal and a blanket that had been Thomas's. He took them without protest, which told her more about how cold he actually was than any words would have. Samuel sat across from him, fascinated. "Don't you get cold?" the boy asked. "Sure." "Then why do you work in the snow?" "Because it needs doing." "But Ma said you were leaving anyway." "Samuel," Eliza warned. "She did. She said you were just passing through." Creed looked at Eliza, something unreadable in his expression. "Your ma's probably right." "Then why work so hard if you're just leaving?" "Because leaving doesn't mean not caring." Samuel thought about that for a moment, his face serious in the way children got when they were trying to understand adult logic. "That doesn't make sense." "No," Creed agreed. "I suppose it doesn't." They ate in silence after that. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it was getting worse, wind picking up enough to rattle the windows and send snow spiraling past in sheets. "This is going to be a bad one," Eliza said, more to herself than anyone else. "Probably last a day or two," Creed agreed. "Maybe 3. 3 days?" "Could be. Hard to tell with November storms. They either blow through or settle in." Eliza's hands tightened on her coffee cup. 3 days of a stranger in her barn, eating her food, working himself half to death on her land. 3 days of Samuel getting attached to someone who would leave the moment the weather cleared. 3 days of remembering what it felt like to not be alone. "You can't stay in the barn for 3 days, she heard herself say. Creed looked up. "I'll manage." "You'll freeze, I've survived worse." "Stop saying that." She set her cup down hard enough to slosh coffee onto the table. "Stop acting like suffering is just something you're supposed to accept." "Isn't it?" "No, it's not." She grabbed a rag to clean up the spilled coffee, needing something to do with her hands. "There's a spare room. Was supposed to be for storage, but we never got around to filling it. You can sleep there until the storm passes." "Mrs. Rowan." "It's not charity. You've worked enough to earn a warm place to sleep, and if you freeze to death in my barn, I'll feel obligated to bury you, and the ground's too frozen for that to be anything but miserable." Samuel giggled at that, quickly trying to hide it behind his hand. Creed studied her for a long moment, and Eliza had the uncomfortable feeling of being seen more clearly than she'd like. "All right," he said finally. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just don't make me regret it." The rest of the morning passed in a strange kind of domesticity. The storm kept them inside, so Creed turned his attention to smaller repairs. A loose cabinet hinge, a crack in the window frame that let in drafts, the table leg that wobbled just enough to be annoying. He worked with quiet efficiency while Eliza tried to pretend she was doing normal things, not watching a stranger fix pieces of her life she'd given up on fixing herself. Samuel followed Creed around like a puppy, asking endless questions that would have driven most men crazy. But Creed answered each one with patience that seemed genuine, not forced. "Why do you carry a knife like that?" "Because a tool you can't reach when you need it isn't much use." "Why's your horse so big?" "Because I'm so big. Small horse would look silly." "Why don't you talk much?" "Because listening's usually more useful than talking. Ma says talking's how people understand each other." "Your ma's probably right about that too." Around midday, Eliza started cooking again, partly because they needed to eat and partly because it gave her something to do besides watch Creed work. She made stew from the vegetables she'd been hoarding and the bacon he'd brought, and the smell filled the cabin until it felt almost like a home instead of just a place they existed in. "You cook like someone who's had practice," Creed said, watching her work. "Had to learn." Thomas was hopeless in the kitchen. He was good at other things, though. It wasn't a question, but Eliza answered anyway. He could build anything, fix anything, make anything grow, just couldn't cook worth a damn. "My father was like that. Could track a deer through rock, but burnt water trying to make coffee." It was the first personal thing Creed had offered without being asked. Eliza found herself curious despite herself. "He teach you to track?" "He did, before he died." "I'm sorry. Long time ago." "Still sorry." Creed was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Appreciate that." Samuel appeared then, breaking the moment. "Mr. Creed, can you show me how to whittle? Ma won't let me use the knife." "That's because you'll cut yourself," Eliza said. "But Mr. Creed could teach me to be careful." "Mr. Creed is not—" She stopped. Because what? Not staying? Not family? Not someone they could depend on? All true, but suddenly hard to say out loud. Creed saved her. Tell you what, son. Storm keeps up. Maybe tomorrow I'll show you how to handle a blade safe. But only if your ma says it's all right. Samuel turned pleading eyes on Eliza. Can he, ma? Please? She should say no, should maintain the distance, keep the boundaries clear. But the hope in her son's face was the first real joy she'd seen there in months. We'll see. That's almost yes. That's maybe. Don't push it. They ate lunch together, the three of them crowded around the small table while snow piled against the windows, and the fire crackled and the cabin creaked under wind that sounded like it was trying to tear the world apart. It should have felt awkward, a stranger inserted into their grief and struggle. Instead, it felt almost normal. That scared Eliza more than the storm. After lunch, Creed insisted on cleaning the dishes while Eliza protested and eventually gave in. Samuel worked on his letters at the table, tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when he was trying hard. How's your schooling? Creed asked, drying a plate. Don't have any right now, Samuel said. School's in town and it's too far to walk every day. Your ma teach you? When she has time, but she's always working. What are you learning now? Letters, mostly. And numbers. Ma says reading's important. She's right. Reading's how you learn things that nobody around you knows. Samuel looked up, interested. Can you read? Well enough? Ma reads real good. She used to read to me every night from a book about knights and dragons. But the book got damaged in the rain and we couldn't save it. Eliza's hand stilled in the wash water. She'd forgotten about that, or tried to. The book had been one of Samuel's few treasures, and watching it fall apart had felt like watching another piece of their old life dissolve. That's hard, Creed said simply, losing a good book. Do you have any books? Samuel asked. Not with me, but I've read a few. What kind? Adventure stories, mostly, tales about places I'd never been. Did you go to those places after? Some of them. Were they like the book said? Creed smiled at that, small and sad. They were different. Real places usually are. Eliza finished the dishes in silence, listening to Creed and Samuel talk about books and places and things that existed beyond the narrow world of their struggling homestead. It hurt, hearing Samuel's hunger for more than they could give him. But it also reminded her that there was more, that survival wasn't the same as living, that maybe she'd been so focused on getting through each day that she'd stopped imagining there could be days worth more than just getting through. The afternoon wore on. The storm didn't let up. Creed eventually settled into the chair by the fire with a piece of wood and his knife, working it into shape with small, precise cuts. Samuel watched, fascinated, until Eliza made him go back to his letters. She tried to work on mending, there was always mending, but found her eyes drifting to Creed. The way his hands moved, sure and steady. The way he seemed comfortable with silence, not needing to fill it with empty words. The way he'd just appeared in their lives and started fixing things, like it was the most natural thing in the world. What are you making? She asked finally. He held up the wood. It was starting to take the shape of a bird, wings partially spread. Hawk, he said. Maybe. For Samuel? Figured he might like it. He'll love it, but you don't have to. I know. He went back to carving, doing it anyway. Eliza opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Let him carve. Let him give her son a small piece of joy. What harm could it do? Everything, a voice in her head whispered. It could do everything. By evening, the storm was still raging, and the temperature had dropped enough that frost crept across the inside of the windows despite the fire. Creed brought in more wood, enough to last through the night, and Eliza made dinner from supplies that wouldn't have existed without him. They sat together again, eating and talking about small things. Samuel told stories about the friends he'd had in town before they'd become too poor for friendship. Creed talked about horses he'd known, trails he'd ridden, mountains that looked like they could touch the sky. Eliza mostly listened, occasionally adding a comment or memory, feeling herself relax in a way she hadn't since Thomas died. It was dangerous, this feeling, comfortable, safe. After dinner, Samuel yawned so wide his jaw cracked. Bedtime, Eliza said. But, no buts. You're falling asleep in your soup. Am not. R2. Go. He went, but not before stopping by Creed's chair. Will you still be here in the morning? Creed glanced at Eliza, and something passed between them. A question, maybe, or a promise neither of them was ready to make. "Storm's still blowing," he said. "So probably." "Good." Samuel smiled, quick and bright. "Night, Mr. Creed." "Night, son." When Samuel was in bed and the cabin had settled into nighttime quiet, Eliza found herself alone with Creed for the first time all day. It felt different than when they'd been working, more intimate. Like the darkness and the storm had created a space separate from the world, where normal rules didn't quite apply. "He's a good boy," Creed said, still working on the wooden hawk. "He is. Too good sometimes. Tries to be strong for me." "Gets that from you. I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn." "That's a kind of strong." Eliza wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why are you really doing this? And don't say because you remember being turned away. There's more to it than that." Creed was quiet for a long time, the knife making soft sounds against wood. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I had a sister," he said, "long time ago. After my father died, we didn't have much. Mother did her best, but it wasn't enough. And I was too young and too stupid to help the way I should have." "What happened?" "She got sick. Winter sickness, the kind that kills if you're not strong enough to fight it. We didn't have money for a doctor, didn't have food to build her strength back up. And I watched her fade day by day until there was nothing left but bones and breathing. Did she... She lived, barely. But it changed her. Changed both of us." He paused, examining the hawk. "Point is, I know what it looks like when people are hanging on by their fingernails. And I know what happens when nobody reaches out to help them up." "So you're helping us because of your sister?" "I'm helping because I can. Because I've got supplies I don't need and skills I can share and nothing better to do with either one. Is that enough of a reason?" "I don't know. Is it true?" He smiled at that, brief and honest. "True enough." They sat in silence after that, the fire burning low, the storm howling outside. Eliza felt something shifting inside her, some wall she'd built starting to crack. It would be so easy to let it fall, to accept this man's help, his presence, his steady capability, to stop fighting so hard to prove she didn't need anyone. But easy had never worked out for her before. "The spare room's through there," she said, standing. "There's blankets in the chest. Should be warmer than the barn, anyway." "Thank you." "And Creed?" He looked up. "Tomorrow, if the storm breaks, you should go. Not because I don't appreciate what you've done, but because Samuel's starting to believe you'll stay, and when you don't, it'll hurt him." "And you?" he asked quietly. "Will it hurt you?" The question caught her off guard. She stood there, coffee cup in her hands, trying to find an answer that was true without being too true. "I stopped letting things hurt me when I buried my husband," she said finally. "So no, it won't hurt me." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Creed nodded like he believed her, or like he was willing to pretend he did. "Good night, Mrs. Rowan." "Good night." She went to her room and lay in bed listening to the storm and the unfamiliar sound of someone else moving through her home. It should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like something she'd been missing without knowing she was missing it. Sleep was a long time coming. The storm lasted 3 days, just like Creed had predicted. 3 days of being trapped inside with a stranger who was becoming less strange with every hour. 3 days of watching Samuel laugh again, really laugh, not the careful happiness he'd learned to perform. 3 days of feeling the cabin become something more than just shelter. Creed taught Samuel to whittle on the second day, showing him how to hold the knife, where to cut, how to read the grain of the wood. Eliza watched them work together, heads bent close, and felt her throat get tight. "Not like that," Creed said patiently. "Knife away from your body, always away." "Like this?" "Better. Keep your thumb tucked. That's right." "I'm making a horse." "I can see that." "It doesn't look like a horse." "Not yet, but it will." On the third day, Creed fixed the wobble in Samuel's bed and replaced a floorboard that had rotted through. Small things. The kind Thomas would have done if he'd lived. Eliza tried not to notice, tried not to compare, but the comparisons came anyway. Thomas had been loud, laughing, full of plans and dreams that outpaced their reality. Creed was quiet, careful, present in a way Thomas never quite managed. Not better, just different. And maybe that was worse because it meant she couldn't hold on to Thomas's memory as the only way a good man could be. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the wind finally started to die. The snow had stopped hours before, leaving the world buried under white that glittered in the last of the daylight. "Storm's breaking," Creed said, looking out the window. Samuel's face fell. "Does that mean you're leaving?" "Samuel," Eliza warned. "But, Ma, Mr. Creed has his own life, his own plans. He doesn't need a little boy pestering him about staying." "I'm not pestering." "You are. Apologize." "But now." Samuel's eyes filled with tears, but he turned to Creed. "I'm sorry. Nothing to apologize for," Creed said gently. "And for what it's worth, I've liked having someone to talk to. Gets lonely on the trail." "Then stay." The words burst out of Samuel before Eliza could stop them. "Please. You could live in the barn, and we could help you, and you wouldn't have to be lonely anymore." "Samuel, that's enough." "But why can't he stay? We have room, and he helps, and he's nice, and because people don't just stay because a little boy asks them to." Eliza's voice came out harsher than she'd intended. "Life doesn't work that way. Mr. Creed has places to be and things to do, and we are not his responsibility." Silence crashed down like a fallen tree. Samuel stared at her, tears spilling over now, and Creed looked at his plate like he wished he could disappear into it. "I hate you," Samuel whispered. "Samuel, I hate you, and I hate this place, and I hate that Daddy died and left us here alone." He ran to his room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, Eliza could hear him crying, muffled and broken. She stood, intending to go after him, but Creed's voice stopped her. "Let him settle first. He's angry, not wrong. He had no right. He's 6, and he's scared, and for 3 days he got to pretend things might be different." Creed finally looked at her, and his eyes were kind but firm. "That's not his fault. It's not yours either. Isn't it? I'm the one who stayed. I knew it would be hard when I left, but I stayed anyway. Because of the storm. At first, maybe. But I could have gone yesterday, when the wind died down. Could have gone this morning, before the snow got soft. I stayed because—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter why. Point is, he's right to be angry, and you're right to be scared." "I'm not scared." "Yes, you are. You're terrified that if you let yourself need someone, they'll leave. Or worse, they'll die. And you'll have to go through all that pain again." The accuracy of it felt like a slap. Eliza's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. "You don't know anything about what I feel." "No, ma'am. But I know what I see. And I see a woman who's been strong for so long she's forgotten it's okay to bend sometimes. I bend, I break. Or you bend and you survive. There's a difference." Eliza wanted to argue, to prove him wrong, to maintain the walls she'd built so carefully. But she was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of pretending, tired of being alone with grief that had nowhere to go but deeper. "What do you want from me?" she asked, and hated how broken her voice sounded. "Nothing. I want to help, that's all." Nobody helps for nothing. Maybe I'm trying to make up for the times nobody helped me. That's not my burden to carry. "No," Creed agreed. "But maybe it's mine to offer." From the other room, Samuel's crying had quieted to occasional hiccups. Eliza looked toward his door, then back at Creed. "If you stay," she said slowly, "it can't be because of him. Can't be because he asked, or because you feel sorry for us. If you stay, it has to be because you want to. Because you're choosing this, not because you feel obligated. And if I choose to stay, then you have to mean it. No leaving when things get hard. No running when the next town looks more interesting. Samuel's already lost one person he loved. I won't let him lose another." "And you?" Creed asked again. "What about what you'll lose?" Eliza met his eyes, and for the first time in 3 days, she let herself be honest. "I've already lost everything that mattered. At this point, I'm not sure there's anything left to lose. It wasn't romantic or hopeful or any of the things stories said moments like this should be. It was just true, raw, and real and painful." Creed stood, walked around the table, and stopped in front of her. Close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver starting in his hair, the scar that ran along his jaw. "I'll stay," he said. "Not because your son asked, though that matters. Not because you need help, though you do. I'll stay because for 3 days, I felt like maybe I could stop running, and I'd like to see if that feeling lasts. And if it doesn't, then I'll tell you before I go. I won't just disappear." It wasn't a promise of forever, but it was honest, and honesty was rarer than forever anyway. "All right," Eliza said, "you can stay." The next morning felt different. Not better, not worse, just different in a way that made Eliza's chest tight as she moved through the cabin doing things she'd done 1,000 times before. The coffee smelled the same, the fire crackled the same, but Creed's bedroll was tucked in the corner of the spare room and his coat hung by the door next to hers, and everything had shifted just enough to make the familiar feel strange. Samuel came out of his room quiet, eyes red from crying, not quite looking at either of them. He went straight to the table and sat, hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for punishment. "I'm sorry I said I hated you," he told Eliza, voice small. "I know, baby." "I don't really." "I know that too." He finally looked up at her, then over at Creed. "Are you still leaving?" Creed was at the stove, frying bacon that popped and hissed in the pan. "No, I'm staying for a while." Samuel's whole face transformed, hope flooding in so fast it hurt to watch. "Really?" "Really, if that's all right with you." "Yes!" Samuel was out of his chair and across the room before Eliza could blink, wrapping his arms around Creed's waist. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Creed's hands hovered awkwardly for a moment before settling on the boy's shoulders. "Easy now. Still gotta see if your ma and I can stand each other for more than 3 days." "You will. Ma's nice once you get to know her." "I'm standing right here," Eliza said. "See? Nice." Samuel grinned up at Creed, then seemed to remember himself and let go, stepping back. "Sorry. Dad used to say I hugged too hard." "Your dad was wrong," Creed said simply. "No such thing as hugging too hard." They ate breakfast with a weird energy hanging over the table, like nobody quite knew what the new rules were. Creed was staying, but what did that mean? Where would he sleep? What would he do? What were they to each other now besides people sharing space and meals? Eliza cleared the plates and tried not to think about it. Tried not to notice how natural Creed looked sitting in Thomas's chair, or how right it felt to have another adult voice in the morning, or how much easier breathing seemed when she wasn't carrying everything alone. "I need to go into town," she said, more to break the silence than anything. "Check if Morrison will extend credit now that things are different." "I can come with you," Creed offered. "No need. Wasn't offering because of need. Thought you might want the company." "I'm fine alone." "I know you are. Question is whether you want to be." Eliza stopped mid-wipe on a plate that was already clean. The question felt bigger than it was, touching on things she wasn't ready to name yet. "Samuel needs watching," she said instead. "I can watch myself," Samuel protested. "I'm 6. 6 isn't old enough to be alone. As if you're careful." "Samuel." "I'll stay with him," Creed cut in. "We've got that horse he's carving. Could use some work." Samuel brightened immediately. "Can we? Please, Ma?" Every instinct Eliza had screamed against it, leaving her son with a man she'd known less than a week, trusting him with the only thing in her life that mattered. But Creed had already proven himself, hadn't he? Fixed her roof, split her wood, brought food when they were starving. Stayed when he could have left. "All right," she heard herself say. "But you listen to Mr. Creed. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you," she turned to Creed, "if anything happens, nothing's going to happen. We'll carve. Maybe check the fence line if it's not too cold, that's all." "The fence can wait. Can it?" Creed met her eyes, steady and sure. "Because from what I've seen, most of your South Pasture fence is held together by prayer and stubbornness. Another good wind, and you'll be chasing your horse to the next county. We don't have a horse anymore. Had to sell it." Something flickered across Creed's face. "Right, still, fence ought to be checked." Eliza wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. The fence had been on her list of things to fix since September, buried under 100 other things she couldn't manage alone. "Fine, check the fence, but don't let him near the creek. Water's fast this time of year." "Understood." She gathered her shawl and the small amount of money she'd managed to scrape together, trying to ignore how wrong it felt to leave. She'd been alone with Samuel since Thomas died, The two of them against the world. Adding a third person changed the math in ways she didn't know how to calculate. At the door, she paused. Creed? Ma'am? Thank you for staying. Haven't done anything yet worth thanking. You're here. That's enough. She left before he could respond, before she could see his face and have to interpret what it meant. The walk to town was cold enough to make her eyes water, the snow from the storm still deep in places where the sun hadn't reached. Her boots broke through the crust with each step, and by the time she reached Bitter Creek's main street, her feet were soaked and numb. Morrison's Mercantile looked exactly the same as it had a week ago, but Eliza felt different walking through the door. She had food at home now, had help, had options that didn't involve begging for credit she couldn't repay. Morrison looked up from his ledger, and his expression did something complicated when he saw her. Mrs. Rowan? Mr. Morrison? Didn't expect to see you so soon. Thought the storm might keep folks home for a while yet. Needed some things. Of course. He set down his pen, and his eyes flicked over her with something that might have been assessment, or might have been guilt. I hear you've taken on help, that drifter who was asking about homestead land. News traveled fast in small towns. Eliza kept her face neutral. Mr. Creed is helping with repairs in exchange for room and board. Temporary arrangement. Temporary? Morrison's tone suggested he didn't believe her. Well, a woman alone does need a man's help, I suppose. The condescension in his voice made her jaw tight. I'm managing fine. I'm sure it just seems convenient is all. Strange man shows up, you're suddenly set with supplies. He's living on your land. Are you implying something, Mr. Morrison? Not implying anything. Just observing that folks will talk. Let them talk. I need lamp oil and thread. Can you manage that, or should I take my business elsewhere? There was no elsewhere, and they both knew it, but Morrison's face reddened anyway. Of course, Mrs. Rowan, no need for hostility. She paid for her items with coins that Creed had insisted she take from the money he'd left for barn rental, refusing to meet Morrison's eyes while he wrapped her purchases. The walk home felt longer than the walk in, her mind churning with anger and humiliation, and the sick certainty that Morrison was right about one thing. People would talk. A widow taking in a strange man, living alone with him, no family nearby to make it proper. It didn't matter that Creed slept in the spare room, that everything between them was practical and necessary. The appearance was what mattered, and the appearance was damning. She was so caught up in her thoughts that she almost walked past Mrs. Hartwell's boarding house without noticing the woman herself standing on the porch. Eliza, dear! Eliza stopped, every muscle tensing. Mrs. Hartwell, I was hoping to catch you. May I have a word? It wasn't really a question. Eliza climbed the porch steps, trying to prepare herself for whatever poison would come wrapped in concern this time. Mrs. Hartwell waited until they were alone, then dropped her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I wanted to speak with you about your current situation. What situation is that? Don't play coy, dear. The whole town knows you've taken in that Creed fellow. Living under your roof, working your land, people are concerned. Concerned about what exactly? Your reputation, for one thing. A widow living alone with an unmarried man, it simply isn't done, not in decent society. Then I suppose it's fortunate I'm no longer part of decent society. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes narrowed. There's no need for that tone. I'm trying to help. Are you? Because it sounds more like you're trying to shame me. I'm trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake. This man, you know nothing about him. Where he's from, what he's running from, what his intentions are. His intentions are to help me survive the winter, that's all. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like he's taking advantage of a desperate woman. The words hit like a punch. Eliza felt her face flush, anger and shame mixing together until she couldn't tell which was which. With respect, Mrs. Hartwell, my arrangements are none of your business. They are when they reflect on this community. We have standards, Eliza, moral standards that allowed you to watch me starve? The question came out sharper than Eliza intended. These moral standards you're so concerned about, where were they when I was turned away from the mercantile? When I couldn't feed my son? When decent society decided my dead husband's credit was no longer good? Mrs. Hartwell drew herself up, offended. That's hardly fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? A stranger showed me more kindness in one afternoon than this town has shown me in 3 months. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about what decent society thinks of my choices. Well, Mrs. Hartwell's voice could have cut glass. I can see there's no reasoning with you. But mark my words, Eliza Rowan, this will end badly. Men like that don't stay. They take what they want and move on, and you'll be left with nothing but a ruined reputation and a broken heart. Then at least I'll be left alive, Eliza said, and walked away before Mrs. Hartwell could respond. Her hands shook the whole way home. Not from cold this time, but from rage and fear and the horrible certainty that Mrs. Hartwell might be right. Not about Creed's intentions, she believed those were honest, but about the ending. People like Creed didn't stay. They were built for moving, for horizons, for roads that led somewhere else. And when he left, what would she have? A reputation in tatters, and a son who'd learned to hope again just in time to have it crushed. She was so caught up in her thoughts that she didn't notice anything wrong until she came around the last bend and saw Samuel standing in the yard alone, face pale and scared. "Ma!" He ran to her, and her heart stopped. "What's wrong? Where's Creed?" "At the south fence. There was a cow, not ours, must have wandered from somewhere, and it got tangled in the wire, and Mr. Creed went to help it, but the fence broke and now he's—" Eliza was running before Samuel finished, her purchases forgotten in the snow. The south fence was a quarter-mile from the cabin, over rough ground that had been treacherous even before the storm. She ran anyway, breath burning in her lungs, terror making her clumsy. She found him at the fence line, covered in blood. "Jesus Christ! It's not mine," Creed said quickly. He was kneeling next to a cow that was very much dead, its throat torn open by barbed wire. "Mostly not mine." "Mostly?" He held up his left hand, which was wrapped in what looked like a strip of his shirt. Blood was seeping through the fabric. "Wire caught me when I was trying to free her. By the time I got her loose, she'd already bled out. Nothing I could do." Eliza knelt beside him, reaching for his hand. "Let me see." "It's fine. Let me see." He unwrapped the makeshift bandage, and Eliza's stomach turned. The cut ran from his palm to his wrist, deep enough that she could see the white of something that might have been tendon. Blood welled up fresh when the pressure was released. "This needs stitching." "I know." "Can you walk?" "Can I? Yes, of course I can walk. It's my hand, not my leg." "Don't be smart with me right now." She helped him up, and they made their way back to the cabin slowly, Creed's hand wrapped again and held against his chest. Samuel met them in the yard, eyes huge. "Is he going to die?" "No," Eliza said firmly, "but I need you to get the medicine kit from under my bed, and boil water. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." Inside, she sat Creed down and unwrapped his hand again, this time with better light to see by. The cut was worse than she'd thought, ragged and dirty from the rusty wire. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "I know." She cleaned it first with whiskey that made Creed hiss through his teeth, but otherwise stay silent. Then she threaded the needle she kept for mending with the thinnest thread she had, wishing desperately for proper surgical tools, for a doctor, for anything except her shaking hands, and a man who was bleeding because he'd tried to help an animal that wasn't even theirs. "Why didn't you just let it die?" she asked, pushing the needle through skin that felt too much like leather. "Because it was suffering." "So you decided to suffer instead." "Seemed fair." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." "Probably." She worked in silence after that, making small, careful stitches that would hold the wound closed but would definitely scar. Creed watched her work, his face pale but steady, not making a sound even though she knew it had to hurt. "You're good at this," he said finally. "Had practice. Thomas was always cutting himself on something. He was lucky to have you." "Didn't feel lucky when he died." "No, I don't suppose it did." Eliza tied off the last stitch and wrapped his hand in clean cloth, trying not to think about how Mrs. Hartwell would react if she knew Creed had been injured on their land. More ammunition for the gossips, more proof that having him here was dangerous. "Thank you," Creed said quietly. "For what? Stitching up a wound you got because I can't maintain my own fence? For caring enough to stitch it at all?" The words settled into the space between them, heavy with meaning she didn't want to examine. Eliza stood, putting distance between them before she could do something stupid like cry or touch his face or ask him to promise he'd never leave. "You need to rest that hand. No work for at least a week." "Can't rest. Too much needs doing." Then it'll wait. Eliza, don't argue with me. You're injured because you were helping me, and I won't have you making it worse by being stubborn. That's rich coming from you. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Yeah, well, takes one to know one. Samuel appeared in the doorway then, holding the wooden hawk Creed had carved. I finished it, he said shyly, while you were gone. Is it okay? Creed held out his good hand and Samuel placed the carving in it. The hawk was rough, amateur, the wings uneven and the head slightly too large, but it was recognizable, and more than that, it was made with care. It's perfect, Creed said. Really? Really? Your first carving, and it's already better than mine was. You're just saying that. I'm not. Mine looked like a potato with wings. Samuel giggled, and the sound was so normal, so purely happy, that Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. This was what she'd been fighting so hard to preserve and protect, not just survival, but the possibility of joy. And Creed had given them that, however temporarily, however dangerously. That night, after Samuel was asleep and Creed's hand had been checked and rewrapped, Eliza found herself unable to settle. She moved through the cabin straightening things that didn't need straightening, her mind racing with everything that had happened and everything it might mean. Creed watched her from his chair, patient as stone. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, he said finally. I'm fine. You're not. How would you know? Because you've checked the door 3 times in the last 10 minutes, and we both know it's locked. Eliza stopped pacing. Mrs. Hartwell cornered me in town today. Ah. She had some thoughts about our arrangement. I imagine she did. Said people are talking, said it looks improper, you living here. Does it bother you, what people think? No. Yes. I don't know. Eliza sank into the chair across from him, suddenly exhausted. I spent my whole life caring what people thought, trying to be respectable, proper, worthy of their good opinion. And where did it get me? Turned away when I needed help, judged for accepting it when it finally came. So stop caring. That easy? Didn't say it was easy. Said you should do it anyway. Eliza looked at him, really looked, taking in the bandaged hand and the tired eyes, and the way he sat like someone who'd learned to find comfort in uncomfortable places. Why did you really stay? She asked. And don't give me the line about feeling like you could stop running. I want the truth. Creed was quiet for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest in a way that made her chest ache. Because I'm tired, he said simply. Tired of moving, tired of being alone, tired of waking up in places that don't matter with people who don't care. And when I was here, for those 3 days during the storm, I woke up and it felt like maybe this place could matter. Like maybe you and Samuel could care, if I gave you reason to. Like maybe I could build something instead of just passing through. That's a lot of maybes. It is. What if they don't work out? What if you wake up in a month and realize you made a mistake? Then I'll have tried. And trying's more than I've done in a long time. Eliza wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that this time would be different, that this man would stay, that the maybes would become certainties. But trust was a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. I can't make you any promises, she said. Can't promise I'll be easy to live with, or that this will work, or that Samuel won't drive you crazy with questions. I'm not asking for promises. What are you asking for? A chance, that's all. It should have felt like too much. Instead, it felt like exactly enough. Okay, Eliza said. A chance. They sat there in the firelight, not touching, not moving, just being in the same space together, while the night deepened and the world outside went cold and still. And for the first time since Thomas died, Eliza let herself imagine a future that wasn't just survival. The following days fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Creed worked one-handed, insisting on doing what he could despite Eliza's protests. He fed the chickens, hauled water, kept the fire going. Small things, but they added up to the difference between exhaustion and sustainability. Samuel followed him everywhere, chattering endlessly, asking questions that would have tested a saint's patience. But Creed answered each one with the same calm attention, and Eliza found herself listening too, learning things about the man who'd appeared in her life like weather. Sudden, unavoidable, potentially dangerous. He'd been born in Montana, raised by a father who taught him to track and a mother who taught him to read. The sister he'd mentioned had married a farmer and now had 3 children of her own. He'd worked in mines, on ranches, as a guide for hunters who wanted to pretend they were frontiersmen. He'd been engaged once, briefly, to a woman who decided she'd rather marry someone who stayed in one place. "Do you regret it?" Eliza asked one evening while they were preparing dinner. Samuel was outside, playing in the snow that had started to melt. "Letting her go?" "Sometimes, but she was right to choose differently. I wasn't ready to stay then. And now? Now I'm trying to be." The honesty of it made her throat tight. She focused on cutting vegetables, needing something to do with her hands. "I went to see Morrison again yesterday," she said, changing the subject. "Paid off what I owed him." "With what money?" "Some I'd saved, some from selling eggs to the Hendersons." "Eliza, don't. I needed to do it myself, needed to stand in that store and prove I could manage my own debts." "And did it feel good, proving that?" "No, it felt necessary." Creed set down the pot he'd been scrubbing. "You know you don't have to prove anything to me, right?" "I'm not trying to prove anything to you." "Aren't you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still trying to show the world you don't need help, even when you have it, even when accepting it doesn't make you weak. You don't understand." "I understand that your husband died and left you in an impossible situation. I understand that you've been fighting to keep your head above water for months. I understand that accepting help feels like admitting defeat." He moved closer and his voice softened. "But Eliza, you're not defeated. You're still here, still fighting, still keeping your son safe and fed and happy. That's not weakness, that's strength." She wanted to argue, to push back against words that felt too kind to be true. But something in her was so tired of fighting, even against kindness. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "Do what?" "Let someone help. Let someone in. I've been alone so long I've forgotten how to be anything else." "Then we'll figure it out together. Both of us fumbling around, making mistakes, trying anyway." "That doesn't sound very romantic." "No, it sounds real. And real, Eliza was starting to understand, might be better than any romance she'd imagined. December arrived with cold that made the earlier storms seem gentle. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in the bucket overnight, and frost painted the inside of the windows in patterns that looked like frozen flowers. Creed's hand healed slowly, the stitches holding despite his insistence on working before he should. They fell into a pattern of survival that felt like living. Creed mended fence while Eliza tended the chickens and what remained of their kitchen garden under snow. Samuel learned to read better, practicing with Creed in the evenings by firelight. They ate together, worked together, existed in the same space until the edges of stranger and family started to blur. But underneath the pattern, tension was building, not between them, but in the world outside. The cold deepened, supplies in town grew scarce, and Eliza could feel something coming, the way animals sense storms before they arrived. She was right. The blizzard hit on a Tuesday, turning the world white in minutes. Wind screamed around the cabin, finding every crack and gap, and snow fell so thick that Eliza couldn't see the barn from the porch. "This is bad," Creed said, standing at the window. "How bad?" "Worst I've seen in years. Could last days." "We have enough food." "It's not food I'm worried about. It's the animals. Chickens in the barn won't survive cold like this without heat. We can't bring them inside." "No, but I can stay with them. Keep a fire going in the barn, make sure they don't freeze." "Absolutely not. That barn barely stands in good weather. You'll freeze to death out there." "Better me than the chickens? They're your food supply for the winter." "They're not worth your life." "That's not your call to make." They stared at each other, the argument crackling between them like lightning. Outside, the wind hit the cabin hard enough to make the walls groan. "Please," Eliza said, and hated how her voice broke. "Please don't go out there." "I have to. You know I do." "Then I'm coming with you." "What about Samuel?" She turned to find her son standing in the doorway of his room, eyes wide and frightened. "I'll be okay, Ma," he said, trying to sound brave. "I'm not a baby." "Samuel?" "Mr. Creed's right. We need those chickens, and he needs help." The fear in her chest was a living thing, clawing and desperate. But Samuel was right, and Creed was right, and sometimes being strong meant doing the thing that terrified you. "All right," she said, "but we do this together, all three of us. They bundled up in every piece of clothing they owned and ventured into the storm like soldiers heading into battle. The cold hit so hard it felt like being struck, and the wind was strong enough to knock Samuel off his feet. Creed caught him, lifting the boy against his chest, and they fought their way to the barn through snow that was already knee-deep. Inside, it was barely warmer, but at least the wind couldn't reach them. The chickens huddled in their roost, already looking half frozen. "We need fire," Creed said, "and we need to block as many gaps as we can." They worked in desperate silence, Eliza stuffing rags into cracks, while Creed built a fire in an old barrel, feeding it carefully to keep it burning without burning down the barn. Samuel gathered eggs and tried to warm the chickens with his own body heat, talking to them in a soft voice that reminded Eliza painfully of Thomas. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. The fire burned low, and Creed fed it with wood they'd stacked in the corner, wood that was meant to last weeks but wouldn't last the night at this rate. "We're going to run out," Eliza said. "I know." "Then what?" "Then we make choices." She understood what he meant. The chickens or themselves, food for the winter or survival through the night. "No," she said firmly. "We don't choose. We find another way." "Eliza, there's furniture in the cabin. The chairs Thomas made, we can burn those." "Those are all you have left of him. And these chickens are all we have left of survival. I know which one he'd choose." Creed looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or understanding. "All right," he said. "Samuel, you stay here with the chickens. Keep them warm. Your ma and I will get more fuel." The trip back to the cabin was worse than the trip out. The storm had intensified, and visibility was down to nothing. They held on to each other, fighting through wind that wanted to tear them apart, through cold that wanted to stop them where they stood. Inside the cabin, Eliza went straight for the chairs. 4 of them, beautifully made, the wood smooth from years of use. Thomas had crafted them their first winter here, working by firelight while she'd sewn curtains for windows that still let in drafts. "You're sure?" Creed asked. "I'm sure." They broke the chairs apart and carried the pieces back through the storm, fed them to the fire that kept the barn just warm enough, just survivable enough. Watched the wood that Thomas had shaped with his own hands turn to ash and heat. Samuel fell asleep against Eliza's side, exhausted from fear and cold. Creed kept the fire going, his injured hand making the work harder, but not impossible. And Eliza sat there in the barn, surrounded by chickens and smoke and the sound of wind that wanted to kill them all, and felt something settle inside her. This was love, not the romantic kind from stories, not the easy kind that came with promises and certainty. This was the kind that meant burning your husband's chairs to keep his son warm, the kind that meant a stranger staying in a freezing barn because someone else's survival mattered, the kind that hurt and cost and demanded everything. "Creed," she said quietly. "Yeah? If we survive this, we will." "When we survive this," she corrected, "I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you're here. And whatever happens after this, I'll never regret saying yes to that first load of supplies." He looked at her across the fire, his face shadowed and lined with exhaustion, and smiled. It was small and tired and more honest than anything she'd seen in months. "Me too," he said simply. The storm lasted 3 days, exactly as he'd predicted. 3 days of fighting to keep the fire going, rationing the wood from the chairs, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. 3 days of cold that went bone deep, of wind that sounded like screaming, of wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake. But they survived. All of them. When the storm finally broke and they stumbled back to the cabin with half-frozen chickens wrapped in Eliza's shawl, the sun was shining like it had never left. Samuel collapsed in his bed and slept for 12 hours straight. Creed checked the property for damage, moving like someone who'd aged 10 years in 3 days. And Eliza stood in her cabin, looking at the empty spaces where the chairs had been, and didn't cry. She'd made the right choice, the only choice. And if she'd learned anything from Thomas's death, it was that you couldn't hold on to the past when the present needed you more. That night, after Samuel was fed and bathed and safely asleep, Eliza found Creed standing outside in the snow, looking up at stars that were finally visible again. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Didn't want to. Feels like I might miss something if I do." "Like what?" "This. You. The fact that we made it through. She stood beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him in the cold air. We did, thanks to you. Thanks to all of us. Samuel was brave as hell. He was, is, gets that from his father. Gets it from you too. They stood in silence for a while, and Eliza felt the weight of the last few days settling into her bones. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that had kept her moving when everything hurt. I need to tell you something, she said finally. All right, when you first showed up, I thought you were the worst thing that could happen to us. Another complication in a life that was already too complicated. Another person to worry about, to feed, to lose? Yes, to lose. She turned to face him. But these last few days, I realized something. You're not another person to lose. You're another person to live with. And there's a difference. Is there? There has to be. Because I can't spend the rest of my life being afraid of loss. Samuel deserves better than that. I deserve better than that. Creed's hand found hers in the darkness, and his fingers were warm despite the cold. So what are you saying? I'm saying stay. Not as hired help or temporary assistance. Stay as... She paused, trying to find the right words. Stay as someone who matters. Someone who belongs here. I'm already staying. No, you're waiting to see if you'll stay. I'm asking you to decide, now, tonight. Stay because you choose to, not because you feel obligated, or because the weather's bad, or because a little boy asked nicely. Stay because you want this. Want us. He was quiet for so long that Eliza's heart started to sink. She'd pushed too hard, asked for too much, scared him away with demands he wasn't ready to meet. But then he squeezed her hand, gentle and sure. I want this, he said. I want you. Want Samuel. Want to build something that lasts instead of just passing through. I want to stay, Eliza. Not because I should, but because I can't imagine leaving. The relief was so strong it made her dizzy. Okay. Good. Good. Very good. They stood there in the snow, hands clasped, looking at stars that had watched them survive. And Eliza felt something she hadn't felt since Thomas died, something she'd thought was gone forever. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could be happy again. Winter deepened after the blizzard, but something fundamental had shifted. The cold was still brutal, the work still endless, but now it felt shared instead of survived. Creed moved his few belongings from the spare room to the barn without being asked, giving Samuel back the space he'd surrendered without complaint. It was a small thing, but Eliza understood what it meant. He was staying, but he was also leaving them room to breathe, to adjust, to figure out what this new arrangement actually looked like. You don't have to sleep out there, she told him the first night after he moved. I know, but it's better this way, for now. Because of what people will say? Because of what Samuel needs. He's been through enough without having to sort out complicated adult things on top of it. Eliza wanted to argue, but he was right. Samuel had accepted Creed's presence with the easy adaptability of children, but there was a difference between accepting a helpful stranger and accepting a replacement for his father. That line needed to be walked carefully, deliberately. Still, it was strange watching Creed head out to the barn each night, knowing he was choosing cold over comfort because he was thinking about her son's heart instead of his own convenience. The work began in earnest the next week. Not the emergency repairs that had occupied Creed's first days, but the deeper work of making the homestead sustainable. He started with the south fence, tearing out the sections that had killed the cow and rebuilding them with new wire he'd had in his wagon. The work was slow with his hand still healing, but he refused to rush it. Fence built wrong will just fail again, he said, when Eliza suggested he could take shortcuts. Better to do it right once than half-assed twice. Samuel helped where he could, holding posts steady while Creed hammered, fetching tools, learning the kind of patient, methodical work that Thomas had never quite managed to teach him. Eliza watched from the cabin window while she worked on mending, seeing the way Creed's patience never wavered even when Samuel asked the same question 3 different ways. Why does it have to be so tight? Because cattle are smart. They'll find any gap and push through. But we don't have cattle yet. But someday you might. Really? Really, this land could support a small herd if it's managed right. Samuel's face lit up with possibilities, and Eliza felt her chest tighten. Creed was building more than fence. He was building futures, giving her son something to imagine beyond just making it through another winter. The town noticed, of course. Hard to keep secrets in a place as small as Bitter Creek. Eliza went in for supplies 2 weeks after the blizzard and felt the weight of stairs following her through Morrison's Mercantile like she'd grown a second head. Mrs. Henderson, who'd bought eggs from her before, pulled her aside near the pickle barrel. "I heard you've got help out at your place. Word travels fast." "It does. And I wanted to say, well, folks are talking, but I think it's good. What you're doing. A woman alone needs help, and if this Creed fellow is providing it honestly, then that's nobody's business but yours." The unexpected support made Eliza's throat tight. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Hartwell's been spreading poison about impropriety and moral standards. She's got half the church ladies convinced you're living in sin." We're not. "I know that, but facts don't matter much when people want to believe the worst." Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice. "My advice? Let them talk. You do what you need to do to survive, and the hell with anybody who judges you for it." Eliza carried those words home like armor. Let them talk. She'd spent too much of her life worrying about the opinions of people who'd never helped her. If they wanted to believe she was living in sin while Creed slept in a freezing barn and rebuilt her fences, that said more about them than it did about her. Still, the judgment stung. She felt it every time she went to town, saw it in the tight smiles and meaningful looks. The worst part was knowing that some of it was understandable. A widow and a single man, living on the same land, sharing meals and work and daily life. From the outside, it probably did look improper. From the inside, it just looked like survival taking a different shape. January brought weather that made December seem gentle. The cold went bone deep and stayed there, and even with Creed's repairs, the cabin struggled to stay warm. They started sleeping in shifts, someone always awake to keep the fire going, to make sure the cold didn't creep in and steal everything while they slept. It was during one of these night watches that Creed finally told her the whole story. Eliza had woken for her shift to find him still up, staring into the fire with the kind of distant look that meant he was somewhere else entirely. "Can't sleep?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter. "Don't want to. Bad dreams." "About what?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough with something that might have been old pain or might have been regret. "I told you about my sister, about watching her nearly die because we were too poor to help her." "I remember." "What I didn't tell you was what happened after. She survived, got better eventually, but I couldn't stay. Every time I looked at her, I remembered how helpless I'd felt, how useless. So I left. Told myself I was going to make something of myself, earn enough to send money back, be the kind of brother who could actually help." "Did you? Send money back?" "Sometimes. When I had it. But mostly I just kept moving, kept working, kept telling myself that someday I'd have enough to go home and face them again." He laughed, bitter and sharp. 15 years of someday, and I never went back. Last letter I got from my mother said my sister had 3 kids and a good husband and a life that didn't need me in it. That doesn't mean she didn't want you in it. Doesn't mean she did either. I made my choice when I left. Can't unmake it now. Eliza moved closer, settling into the chair beside him. "Is that why you stayed here? Because you couldn't go back there?" "Partly, but also because I'm tired of running from things I can't fix. Tired of moving on before I have to face whether I actually matter to anybody." "You matter to Samuel." "I know. That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because what if I leave? What if I wake up one day and the old urge comes back, the need to move, to go, to be anywhere but where I am? I'll break his heart, break yours too, maybe." "Maybe," Eliza agreed. "Or maybe you'll stay, and it'll be hard sometimes. And you'll want to leave, but you won't, because you'll have learned that mattering to people means staying even when it's uncomfortable. Either way, we won't know unless you try." "That's a hell of a gamble. Life's a gamble. At least this way you're betting on something instead of just folding every hand." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. They were alone in the firelight, everyone else asleep, the world outside frozen and silent. It would have been easy to close the distance between them, to find comfort in something more than words. But Eliza held herself still, not because she didn't want it, but because wanting wasn't enough. They needed to build something solid first, something that could hold weight without collapsing. You should get some sleep, she said instead. I'll watch the fire. Eliza. I know, but not yet. Not like this, in the middle of the night when we're both tired and scared. When it happens, if it happens, I want it to be because we chose it, not because we needed comfort. He nodded slowly, understanding without needing her to explain further. You're right, as usual. Don't get used to hearing me say this, but so are you, about most things. Just most? Your technique with an axe could use work. That surprised a laugh out of him, genuine and warm. He stood, touched her shoulder briefly, a connection that promised more without demanding it, and headed for the barn. Eliza watched him go, then turned back to the fire. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, and the cold pressed against the windows like something alive. But inside, the fire burned steady, and Eliza felt something she'd thought was dead stirring back to life. Hope. Careful and cautious and hard-won, but hope nonetheless. The next morning brought news from town via a rider who stopped at their gate looking half frozen. Young Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's oldest boy, bundled in so many layers he could barely move. Ma sent me, he said when Eliza opened the door. Said to warn you there's sickness going around. 3 families hit already. Fever and cough that won't quit. Doc's overwhelmed. What kind of sickness? Creed asked, appearing from the barn. Don't know, just that it's bad. Ma said to stay clear of town if you can, and if anybody here gets sick, send word and she'll try to help. They fed the boy hot coffee and sent him home with thanks and a jar of preserves. When he was gone, Eliza and Creed looked at each other with the same thought written on both their faces. If it reaches us, Eliza started, it won't. You can't know that. No, but we can be careful. No unnecessary trips to town. Keep Samuel away from other kids. Wash our hands. Keep the cabin warm. Pray we get lucky. Pray felt like the operative word. They'd survived the blizzard, rebuilt the fences, made it through the worst of winter. But sickness was different. Sickness didn't care about preparation or hard work or how much you'd already endured. For 2 weeks they held their breath. Eliza went to town only once, covering her face with a scarf and staying away from anyone who looked even slightly ill. Morrison told her the sickness was spreading fast, hitting families regardless of wealth or status. 5 dead already, including a child Samuel's age. That night Eliza held her son close and felt the old terror rising. They'd escaped hunger, survived the cold, but disease was something else entirely, something that could take everything in a matter of days. Ma? Samuel's voice was muffled against her shoulder. Are we going to get sick? I don't know, baby. If we do, will Mr. Creed leave? What? No. Why would you think that? Because people leave when things get hard. You said so yourself. The words hit like a fist. Eliza pulled back to look at her son's face, seeing fear there that had nothing to do with sickness and everything to do with abandonment. I was wrong, she said firmly. Some people leave, but some people stay. And I think Mr. Creed is the staying kind. How do you know? Because he's still here, even though things have been hard since the day he arrived. Because he rebuilt our fence and fixed our roof and slept in a freezing barn during the worst storm I've ever seen. Because when I gave him every chance to leave, he chose to stay. But what if? No what ifs, not tonight. Tonight we trust that tomorrow will come, and we'll face it together, all 3 of us. Samuel nodded, but she could see he wasn't entirely convinced, and honestly, neither was she. Trust was still new, still fragile, but it was all they had. The sickness reached them on a Tuesday. Eliza woke to find Samuel burning with fever, his small body shaking despite the blankets piled on top of him. Terror hit so fast and hard she could barely breathe. Samuel, baby, can you hear me? Ma? His voice was thin, stretched. I'm cold. I know. I'm going to help you. She built up the fire, boiled water, tried every remedy she knew. Willow bark tea for the fever. Cool cloths for his forehead. Sitting with him, holding his hand. Singing songs Thomas used to sing when Samuel was small enough to fall asleep to them. Creed appeared in the doorway, took one look at the situation, and moved immediately into action. He rode to town for medicine despite the risk, came back with fever powder and instructions from the doctor who was too overwhelmed to make house calls. Doc said keep him warm, keep fluids in him, and wait it out, Creed reported. Said most folks are surviving if they're strong enough. And if they're not? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. They settled into a nightmare routine. Eliza stayed with Samuel while Creed handled everything else, feeding the chickens, maintaining the cabin, keeping them supplied with food and water and firewood. He moved through tasks with grim efficiency, and Eliza was too focused on her son to properly appreciate what it meant that he stayed, that he helped, that he never once suggested maybe it was time for him to move on before he caught it too. Samuel got worse before he got better. 2 days of fever so high, he barely recognized them. 2 days of Eliza holding her son and praying to anything that might listen that she wouldn't have to bury another person she loved. 2 days of Creed bringing water and medicine and quiet presence, never telling her it would be okay because they both knew it might not be. On the third day, the fever broke. Eliza woke from a doze to find Samuel's forehead cool, his breathing even. Relief hit so hard she actually sobbed, pressing her face against his small hand and shaking with the force of it. "Ma?" Samuel's voice was weak but clear. "Why are you crying?" "Because you're better, because you're going to be okay." "Was I sick?" "So sick, baby, but you're tough, tougher than the sickness." "Did Mr. Creed leave?" "No, he's been here the whole time." "Good." Samuel's eyes were already closing again, dragging him back toward the healing sleep. "Don't want him to leave ever." "Me neither," Eliza whispered. "Me neither." She found Creed outside an hour later, chopping wood with methodical precision, despite the cold and the exhaustion that showed in every line of his body. "He's better," she said. Fever broke. Creed set down the axe and turned to face her. "Thank Christ." "You look awful. Feel worse. Haven't slept in 3 days." "Neither have I." "You had reason. I was just keeping busy." She crossed the snow-covered yard to stand in front of him, close enough to see the worry lines etched deep around his eyes, the exhaustion making his hands shake slightly. "Thank you," she said, "for staying, for helping, for not running when things got bad." "Where would I go?" "Anywhere. Away from sickness and responsibility and a woman who keeps testing whether you mean it when you say you'll stay." "I mean it. I'm starting to believe you." "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere, Eliza. Not when Samuel's sick, not when things are hard, not when you give me every reason to leave. I'm staying because this is where I want to be. With you. With him. Building something that matters." She kissed him then, before she could think better of it, before caution or propriety or fear could stop her, just rose up on her toes and pressed her mouth to his, tasting snow and exhaustion and promise. He kissed her back like a man who'd been waiting for permission, his hands coming up to frame her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, both shaking, both terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. "That was," Creed started. "Overdue," Eliza finished. "I was going to say unexpected." That too. They stood there in the snow, foreheads pressed together, while the world continued around them, and Samuel slept peacefully inside, and everything felt balanced on the edge of something new and terrifying and wonderful. "I love you," Creed said quietly. "Probably have for a while now, just wasn't sure I had the right to say it." "You have the right. And I—" She paused, testing the words in her mouth. They felt foreign after so long, but also true. "I love you too. I didn't want to. Tried not to. But you made it impossible not to. Sorry about that. Don't be. Just don't make me regret it. I'll do my best." It wasn't a perfect moment. They were both exhausted, dirty from 3 days of crisis, standing in snow that was slowly soaking through their boots. But it was real and honest and theirs. Samuel recovered slowly over the next week. The sickness left him weak and thin, but his appetite returned, and with it his energy and endless questions. He accepted the news that Eliza and Creed were courting. He didn't quite have the words for what they actually were to each other, with the easy adaptability of children who just wanted the adults in their lives to be happy. "Does this mean Mr. Creed will move into the house?" he asked one evening. "Eventually," Eliza said carefully, "but not right away. These things take time." "Why?" "Because grown-up relationships are complicated." "They don't seem complicated. You like him, he likes you, you want to be together. That seems simple." Out of the mouths of children. Eliza smiled despite herself. You're right. It is simple. We're just making it complicated. Then stop. If only it were that easy. But Eliza was still navigating what it meant to love someone after loss, and Creed was still learning what it meant to stay, and they both needed time to figure out how to build something together without losing themselves in the process. The town, predictably, had opinions. When word got out that Eliza and Creed were officially courting, the gossip reached new heights. Mrs. Hartwell made sure everyone knew her thoughts on widows who took up with drifters before their husbands were even cold in the ground. Never mind that Thomas had been dead for 6 months. Never mind that Eliza had nearly starved trying to maintain appearances. Mrs. Henderson defended her, bless her, but the damage was done. Half the town thought Eliza was a fallen woman. The other half thought she was being practical, and nobody seemed to care what Eliza herself thought about it. Let them talk, Creed said when she came home upset from another trip to town. Their opinions don't pay our bills or keep us warm at night. I know, but it's hard hearing people say things about us. About you. What are they saying about me? That you're taking advantage. That you swooped in when I was vulnerable and tricked me into depending on you. Creed's jaw tightened. And what do you say? I say they don't know anything about what happened. About how you helped when nobody else would. About how you stayed when you could have left. About how you've never asked for anything except a chance to prove you mean what you say. Then that's all that matters. But it wasn't. Not really. The judgment wore on her, made her second-guess herself, made her wonder if maybe they were moving too fast, if maybe she should slow down, pull back, protect herself and Samuel from the possibility of more loss. It was Samuel, ironically, who put it in perspective. Ma, he said one night while they were washing dishes. Do you love Mr. Creed? Yes. Does he make you happy? Yes. Does he make you sad? Sometimes, but the good kind of sad. The kind that means I care. Then why do you look worried all the time? Because I'm scared, honey. Scared of making a mistake. Scared of what people will think. Scared of losing someone again. Samuel thought about that for a moment, his small face serious. Dad used to say being scared just means you care about the outcome. He said the trick was doing the thing anyway. The memory hit sharp and sweet. Thomas had said that, usually right before attempting something slightly dangerous and completely unnecessary. But he'd been right. Fear was just proof that something mattered. Your dad was a smart man, Eliza said softly. Yeah, and I think he'd like Mr. Creed. I think he'd want you to be happy, even if it was with someone else. You think so? I know so. Because Dad loved you. And people who really love you want you to be happy, even if they can't be the ones making you happy anymore. Eliza pulled her son into a hug, overwhelmed by how much wisdom could fit into such a small person. He was right. Thomas would have wanted her to be happy, would have wanted Samuel to have a good man in his life, would have understood that loving someone new didn't mean forgetting someone old. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Eliza went to find Creed in the barn. He was tending his horse, brushing the animal with slow, steady strokes. We should get married, she said without preamble. Creed's hand stilled mid-stroke. What? Married. You and me. Soon as the weather breaks and we can get into town for a license. Eliza, I know it's fast. I know people will talk even more than they already are, but I don't care anymore. I love you, you love me, and we're already building a life together. Might as well make it official. Are you sure? Because if you're doing this because of what people are saying, I'm doing this because I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of holding back because of what might happen or what people might think. You've proven yourself 100 times over. You've stayed through sickness and storms and every kind of hardship. You've been a father to Samuel without trying to replace Thomas. You've been a partner to me without demanding I be anything except myself. Creed set down the brush and crossed the barn to stand in front of her. Those are good reasons, but I need to know. Are you marrying me because you want to or because it's practical? Both. Is that allowed? I don't know. Is it? It better be, because I want you, and I want the life we're building, and I want to stop sneaking kisses like we're doing something wrong when we're doing the most right thing I've done since Thomas died. He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promises that didn't need words. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard and grinning like fools. Yes, he said, my answer is yes, to marriage, to building a life, To all of it. Good. Because I wasn't actually asking permission. I noticed. It's one of the things I love about you. Just one? There's a list. It's long. Tell me. Later. Right now I just want to stand here and believe this is real. So they did. Stood in the barn while the horse munched hay and the night deepened outside and their future spread out before them like territory waiting to be explored. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but it was theirs. And that was enough. They were married in March, when the snow finally melted enough to make the trip to town feasible. It was a small ceremony. Just them, Samuel, Mrs. Henderson as witness, and the justice of the peace who looked vaguely disapproving but performed the service anyway. Mrs. Hartwell made a point of crossing the street when she saw them, which told Eliza everything she needed to know about where she stood in Bitter Creek society. But she had Samuel holding one hand and Creed holding the other, and the ring on her finger was simple but real, and none of the rest of it mattered. They stopped at Morrison's on the way home, and the man actually congratulated them, which was more than Eliza had expected. "Heard you two are making it legal," he said. "Good for you. World's hard enough without trying to face it alone." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. About before. About turning you away when you needed help. Wasn't right, even if I had my reasons." The apology surprised her, but she accepted it with grace. Holding on to anger took energy she didn't have anymore. The ride home was quiet, all three of them squeezed onto the wagon seat, watching the mountains turn pink in the setting sun. Samuel fell asleep against Eliza's side, and she leaned into Creed's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him and thinking about how much had changed in 4 months. 4 months ago, she had been alone and starving and convinced she'd have to give up the homestead. Now she had a husband who knew how to fix things, a son who was learning to hope again, and a future that looked like something more than just survival. It wasn't perfect. The work was still hard, the money still tight, the town still judgmental. But they had each other, and they had the land, and they had the stubborn determination to make it work despite everything stacked against them. When they reached the cabin, Creed carried Samuel inside while Eliza lit the lamps. The space looked different now, felt different. Not because anything physical had changed, but because it was officially theirs. All three of them, together. "Home," Creed said softly, settling Samuel into bed. "Yeah," Eliza agreed. "Home." And for the first time since Thomas died, she believed it. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it came with a force that felt like forgiveness. The snow melted in rushing torrents, the creek swelled and sang, and green things pushed up through mud that had been frozen for months. Eliza stood on the porch watching the world transform and felt something inside her doing the same. Creed was in the south pasture, working on the fence that seemed to need constant attention. From the cabin, she could see his figure moving steadily along the line, Samuel trailing behind him like a devoted shadow. Their voices carried on the wind, too distant to make out words but close enough to hear the rhythm of conversation, the occasional burst of the boys' laughter. It had been a month since the wedding, and Eliza was still adjusting to what it meant to be married again. Different from the first time, when she and Thomas had been young and stupid and convinced love was enough to conquer anything. This time she knew better. Knew that love was just the starting point, that the real work came in the daily choosing, the constant negotiation of two people trying to build something together without losing themselves in the process. She and Creed still fought, though the arguments were smaller now, more about where to plant the garden than whether he had the right to stay. He'd moved into the cabin properly after the wedding, taking Thomas's side of the bed with a hesitancy that had broken her heart a little. That first night, they'd lain awake in the dark, not touching, both terrified of what this new intimacy meant. "I keep thinking he's going to come through that door," Creed had said quietly. "Your husband. Tell me to get the hell out of his bed. He's not coming back." "I know, but it feels wrong anyway, like I'm taking something that isn't mine." Eliza had turned to face him then, close enough to see the outline of his features in the moonlight. "It is yours. I'm yours. Not because you took anything, but because I gave it. There's a difference." "Is there? Because sometimes I can't tell." "Then let me make it clear." She'd kissed him, slow and deliberate, until the hesitation melted and he pulled her close with hands that shook slightly. They'd made love carefully that night, both of them aware of the ghost in the room, but refusing to let it dictate their future. It hadn't been perfect or passionate or any of the things stories promised. It had been awkward and tender and achingly real. And Eliza had cried afterward, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of feeling alive again. Now, watching him work in the spring sunshine, she felt gratitude so strong it was almost painful. He'd stayed through winter storms and sickness and gossip that had branded them both as improper. He'd stayed and built fences and taught her son and loved her with a steadiness that felt like bedrock. But she also knew that staying wasn't the same as belonging, and that was the work still ahead of them. Teaching Creed that he didn't have to earn his place here every single day. Teaching herself that accepting help wasn't the same as admitting defeat. Teaching Samuel that loving Creed didn't mean forgetting Thomas. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. A rider was coming up the creek road, moving fast enough to suggest urgency. Eliza's stomach clenched reflexively, old instincts screaming danger, but she forced herself to stay calm. Not every visitor brought disaster. Young Henderson pulled his horse to a stop in front of the cabin, breathing almost as hard as the animal. "Mrs. Creed," he said, and the name still felt strange in her ears. "Ma sent me. There's trouble in town." "What kind of trouble?" "Fire. Started at the Mercantile, spread to 3 other buildings before they got it under control. Morrison's asking for help. Anyone who can spare labor or supplies." Eliza's first instinct was to say no. Morrison had turned her away when she needed help, and the town had judged her for accepting it from someone else. Let them handle their own problems. But then she thought about Mrs. Henderson, who defended her, about the families with children who hadn't chosen to be part of the judgment, about how being better than the people who'd hurt you meant acting better, not just talking about it. "Tell Morrison we'll come," she said. "Give us an hour to gather what we can spare." Henderson nodded and rode off, and Eliza went to find Creed. He was halfway through replacing a post, Samuel handing him tools with the focused attention of someone learning a trade. "Town's on fire," she said without preamble. "Well, parts of it. Morrison's asking for help." Creed's hand stilled on the post. "You want to go?" "I think we should. Don't you?" "Wasn't sure. Morrison didn't exactly treat you well." "No. But this isn't about Morrison. It's about being the kind of people who help when there's need, regardless of whether we were helped when we needed it." Something shifted in Creed's expression, approval mixed with understanding. "All right. What do we have that we can spare?" They took stock quickly, extra blankets they'd accumulated over winter, food that would travel well. The lumber Creed had been saving for a new chicken coop. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and it was given freely. Samuel wanted to come, but Eliza put her foot down. "Too dangerous. Fire might not be completely out. But I want to help. You can help by staying here and watching the place, making sure the chickens are fed, the fire's banked properly. That's important work, too." "It's not the same." "No," Creed agreed, kneeling to Samuel's eye level. "But it's necessary. Someone's got to hold down the fort, and that's one of the most important jobs there is. You think you can handle it?" Samuel's chest puffed out slightly. "Yes, sir." "Good man. We'll be back before dark." They rode into town with the wagon loaded, both of them quiet with their own thoughts. Eliza wondered what they'd find, whether the damage was as bad as Henderson had suggested, whether Morrison would even accept their help, or if pride would make him refuse. Bitter Creek looked like a war zone. The Mercantile was a skeleton of charred beams and collapsed roof. The buildings on either side were damaged but standing, and people were everywhere, hauling water, clearing debris, trying to salvage what could be saved from the ruins. Morrison stood in the middle of it all, directing traffic with a face like granite. When he saw Eliza and Creed pull up with their wagon, something complicated crossed his features. "Mrs. Creed, didn't expect to see you." "Heard you needed help," Eliza said simply. "After the way I treated you." "After the way you treated me, I could stay home and feel justified about it. Or I could come help anyway and be the kind of person I want to be instead of the kind of person you were to me. I'm choosing the second option." Morrison's throat worked, and for a moment Eliza thought he might actually apologize properly. Instead, he just nodded. "Appreciate it. We need all the hands we can get." They worked through the afternoon, Eliza joining the women organizing supplies and temporary shelter, while Creed helped tear down the parts of the Mercantile that were too damaged to save. It was hard, dirty work, and the whole town smelled like smoke and loss. Mrs. Hartwell was there, of course, organizing the church ladies with military precision. When she saw Eliza, her mouth thinned into a disapproving line, but she didn't say anything, probably because she needed the help too badly to refuse it. It was Mrs. Henderson who finally broke the ice, pulling Eliza aside while they were sorting blankets. "Thank you for coming. Means a lot, especially given how some folks have treated you. Can't let people freeze because their neighbors are judgmental." "No, but you could. And nobody would blame you." Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice. "I heard what Morrison said about appreciating it. That's as close to an apology as you're likely to get from him." "I know, it's enough." "Is it? Because you deserved better than what this town gave you." "Maybe. But holding on to anger about what I deserve doesn't keep me warm at night. Moving forward does." Mrs. Henderson smiled at that, sad and knowing. "You're a better woman than most," Eliza Creed. "Not better, just tired of being bitter." They worked until sunset, when Morrison finally called a halt. The Mercantile was a total loss, but the other buildings were salvageable, and nobody had died. In the scheme of things, it could have been much worse. Morrison approached Eliza and Creed as they were loading up to leave. "I wanted to say—" He paused, clearly struggling. "What I did last fall, turning you away when you needed credit. That was wrong. I had my reasons, but they weren't good enough. And I'm sorry." It was more than Eliza had expected. "Thank you. That means something." "Does it? Because I feel like sorry doesn't cover it." "No," Creed said, speaking up for the first time. "But it's a start. And starts matter, even when they come late." Morrison nodded, shook Creed's hand, and walked away looking like a man who'd learned something difficult about himself. Eliza and Creed climbed onto the wagon and headed home through the gathering dusk. "You were right to come," Creed said after they'd gone a mile in silence. "I know. Not usually this confident. I'm learning. Slowly, but learning." "Learning what?" "That being strong doesn't mean carrying everything alone. That accepting help doesn't make you weak. That giving help, even to people who didn't help you, is how you break cycles instead of continuing them." Creed reached over and took her hand, calloused palm against calloused palm. "Where'd you get so wise?" "From making enough mistakes to finally figure out what actually matters." They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, and when they arrived, Samuel ran out to meet them with news that the chickens were fed and the fire was perfect and he'd been responsible the whole time. "Proud of you," Creed told him, ruffling his hair. "You held down the fort like a pro." "Really?" "Really. Couldn't have done better myself." Samuel glowed under the praise, and Eliza felt her heart swell watching them together. This was her family now. Imperfect, patched together from loss and necessity and stubborn hope, but family nonetheless. The weeks that followed were busy with planting season. Creed broke ground for a larger garden than Eliza had attempted before, turning soil that had been fallow since Thomas died. They planted beans and squash and corn, potatoes and carrots and herbs. Samuel helped, learning to tell the difference between seedlings and weeds, learning patience as they waited for green shoots to appear. "Nothing yet," he reported every morning, checking the garden like it might have grown overnight. "Give it time," Creed would say. "Good things rarely come fast." "How long?" "As long as it takes." It was a lesson in trust, Eliza realized. Planting seeds you couldn't see anymore, trusting they'd grow, waiting for results that might not come. Not unlike building a life with someone, really. You put in the work, had faith in the process, and hoped that what grew would be worth the waiting. The town slowly rebuilt. Morrison opened a temporary mercantile in the old saloon building, and life continued its relentless forward march. The gossip about Eliza and Creed died down, replaced by newer scandals and concerns. They weren't quite accepted, but they weren't actively shunned either, which felt like progress. What surprised Eliza most was how little she cared anymore. The town's opinion had felt life or death important 6 months ago. Now it was just background noise, no more significant than wind in the trees or the call of distant crows. She had what mattered: a home, a family, work that meant something, and someone to share the load. In May, the garden started to show results. Green shoots pushing up through dark soil, proof that their work hadn't been for nothing. Samuel was beside himself with excitement, checking the plants multiple times a day, reporting every new leaf like it was breaking news. "The beans sprouted. The carrots are coming up." I think I saw a potato plant, maybe. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Eliza found herself getting excited too. Not just about the garden, but about what it represented. Sustainability, self-sufficiency, a future that didn't depend on the charity of others or the whims of town merchants. Creed built a new chicken coop with the lumber they hadn't donated to the fire relief, and they bought 3 more hens from the Hendersons. The flock was small but productive, giving them eggs enough to eat and some to sell. Small victories, but they added up. June brought the first real test of their new life. A letter arrived from Creed's sister, forwarded through 3 different addresses before finally finding him. Eliza watched him read it on the porch, his face doing complicated things she couldn't interpret. "Everything all right?" she asked when he finally looked up. "My mother's dying. Cancer. Sister says it's weeks, maybe days." Eliza's heart sank. "You need to go." "I know." "Then why do you look conflicted?" "Because going means leaving you and Samuel, and I promised I wouldn't do that." "You promised you wouldn't leave permanently. This is different. This is family needing you, and you should go." "But—" "No buts. Your mother is dying, Creed. You need to be there. Say goodbye, make peace, whatever you need to do. We'll be here when you get back." "You're sure?" "I'm sure. And so are you, or you wouldn't look so torn." He left 2 days later, kissing her hard enough to bruise, making Samuel promise to take care of his mother, promising he'd be back as soon as he could. Eliza watched him ride away and felt the old fear rising. What if he didn't come back? What if his sister convinced him to stay? What if the pull of his old life was stronger than the pull of this new one? But she pushed the fear down and got back to work. There was a garden to tend, chickens to feed, a son to raise. Life didn't stop just because you were scared. Samuel asked about it the first night Creed was gone, both of them sitting at the table with empty chairs that felt too loud. "Is he coming back?" "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because he said he would. And I trust him." "But what if—" "Samuel." Eliza reached across the table and took her son's hand. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But trust means believing people will do what they say, even when you can't see them doing it. And Creed has earned our trust 100 times over. What if his family needs him more than we do? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I don't think they do. I think he's built a life here, with us, and that's not something people give up easily." She believed it when she said it. Believed it through the first week, the second week, the third week with no word. Believed it even when doubt crept in late at night, whispering that maybe she'd been a fool to trust. Maybe Mrs. Hartwell had been right. Maybe men like Creed didn't really stay. But she tended the garden anyway, fed the chickens anyway, taught Samuel his letters anyway. Kept living, kept working, kept choosing to believe that what they'd built was strong enough to survive distance and doubt. The letter came on a Tuesday, 4 weeks after Creed had left. Eliza's hand shook as she opened it. Samuel pressed against her side, both of them holding their breath. The letter was short. His mother had passed peacefully. The funeral had been hard but necessary. His sister had asked him to stay, help with the farm, be part of the family again. He'd almost said yes, because it would have been easier than facing the fear of returning to a life he still wasn't sure he deserved. But he was coming home. To her. To Samuel. To the homestead and the garden and the life they were building together. Because home wasn't where you came from, it was where you chose to be. And he'd chosen them. He'd be back by the end of the week. Eliza read the letter 3 times, then pressed it to her chest and cried. Not from sadness or relief exactly, but from the overwhelming knowledge that trust hadn't been misplaced, that choosing to believe had been the right choice, even when it was hard. "He's coming back," Samuel said, reading over her shoulder. "He is." "I knew he would." "Did you?" "Yeah. Because he loves us. And people who love you don't leave just because something else is easier." Eliza pulled her son close, marveling again at how much wisdom lived in such a small body. He was right. Love wasn't about easy. It was about choosing difficult, over and over, because the person on the other side of difficult mattered more than comfort. Creed returned on Saturday, looking thinner and more tired than when he'd left, but also lighter somehow, like he'd set down a burden he'd been carrying for years. He swept Samuel up in a hug that lifted the boy off his feet, then turned to Eliza with eyes that said everything words couldn't. "I'm home," he said simply. I know. I almost wasn't. Almost convinced myself that staying there made more sense. But you didn't. No. Because sense isn't the same as right. And coming back here, to you, to Samuel, to this place, that's right in a way that staying never could have been. She kissed him there in the yard, with Samuel making disgusted noises, and the chickens clucking their disapproval, and the garden growing wild behind them. Kissed him like a promise, like a welcome, like proof that some things were worth waiting for. That night, after Samuel was asleep, they lay in bed and Creed told her about his mother's death, about the funeral, about his sister's surprise at him having built a life somewhere, about choosing to come back even when staying would have been easier, because easy wasn't what he wanted anymore. He wanted real and messy and hard-won. He wanted this. I'm proud of you, Eliza said quietly, for going, for coming back, for all of it. Wasn't sure I'd make the right choice, but you did, and that matters. They made love that night with an intensity that came from separation and reunion, from the knowledge that they'd both chosen this deliberately, consciously, without the excuse of necessity or convenience. And afterward, lying in the dark with his heart beating steady against her back, Eliza felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. The knowledge that they were building something worth building, together. Summer deepened, and the garden flourished beyond anything Eliza had imagined. The beans climbed their poles in green cascades. The squash sprawled across half the plot, and the corn stood tall and promising. They'd have food for the winter, real food, grown by their own hands on their own land. Samuel turned 7 in July, and they celebrated with a cake made from precious flour and a new whittling knife from Creed. The boy was growing taller, filling out, looking less like the half-starved child of winter and more like someone who'd never known real hunger. Make a wish, Eliza told him, lighting the single candle they could spare. Samuel closed his eyes, thought hard, then blew. When he opened them again, he was grinning. What'd you wish for? Creed asked. Can't tell. It won't come true. Fair enough. But later, when Eliza was tucking him into bed, Samuel whispered it to her. I wished that we could always be like this, all three of us. Happy. Eliza's throat closed up. That's a good wish, baby. Do you think it'll come true? I think we'll do everything we can to make it true. But happiness isn't something that just happens. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice. Like the garden? Exactly like the garden. August brought the first harvest. Beans and squash and carrots. Potatoes that came out of the ground dirty and perfect. They worked together, all three of them, pulling vegetables and cleaning them and storing them for winter. The pantry filled slowly, proof that their work mattered, that they could sustain themselves without depending on anyone else's charity or mercy. Morrison bought some of their surplus, paying fair prices without comment. The transaction felt like a turning point, the final proof that they'd moved from charity cases to participants in the town's economy. Equal footing at last. In September, Creed started talking about getting cattle. Just a few head, enough to give them milk and eventually meat, to use the pasture that was going to waste. Can we afford it? Eliza asked. Barely, but Henderson's selling some of his herd and he'll give us a good price. I think we can make it work. What do you think, Samuel? Eliza turned to her son. Should we get cattle? Samuel's eyes went wide. Really? I can help decide? It affects all of us. So yes, you get a say. Then yes, definitely yes. They bought 3 cows in October and Samuel named them all within the first hour. Bessie, Molly, and Rose. Creed taught him to milk, to care for them, to read the signs of sickness or distress. The boy took to it like he'd been born for it, patient and gentle in ways that made Eliza's heart ache with pride. Winter came again, as it always did, but this time they were ready. The pantry was full, the wood was stacked, the fences were strong. They had food and fuel in each other, and when the first snow fell in November, Eliza watched it from the porch without fear. Creed came to stand beside her, his arm sliding around her waist like it belonged there, which it did. You're smiling, he observed. I am. Why? Because a year ago I was terrified of winter, afraid I wouldn't be able to keep Samuel alive, wouldn't be able to survive on my own. And now look at us. We have more than enough. We're prepared. We're together. We are. Thank you, she said quietly, for showing up that day, for staying, for choosing this life even when it was hard. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for building this with me instead of just surviving next to me. They stood there in the falling snow, watching Samuel play with a stick and the dog they'd acquired somewhere along the way, and Eliza felt the last piece of her grief finally loosen its grip. She would always love Thomas, would always carry him in some part of her heart. But she could love Creed too, differently but just as deeply, without it being a betrayal of what came before. Love wasn't finite. It didn't run out just because you gave it to someone new. That night, after dinner, Samuel asked if he could say something. Of course, honey. What is it? I just wanted to say... He paused, looking between Eliza and Creed with serious eyes. I'm glad Mr. Creed stayed. I'm glad he's my dad now. Well, not my real dad, because that's always going to be my first dad, but my dad now. Is that okay to say? Creed's face did something complicated, emotions playing across it too fast to name. When he spoke, his voice was rough. That's more than okay, son. That's everything. Good. Because I love you, both of you, and I'm glad we're a family. We love you too, Eliza managed, throat tight. So much. They sat there together, the three of them, in the warm cabin while winter raged outside. And Eliza thought about everything it had taken to get here. The hunger and the cold and the fear, the choice to accept help when it was offered, the choice to trust a stranger who became family, the choice to believe that tomorrow could be better than today, even when today was unbearable. Those choices had made the difference. Not luck, not fate, not the intervention of forces beyond their control, just choices, made over and over, even when they were hard, especially when they were hard, because that was the thing about survival. It was never just about making it through. It was about deciding what kind of person you wanted to be while you made it through, whether you let hardship make you bitter or whether you let it teach you what actually mattered, whether you held on to anger or whether you chose grace, whether you built walls or whether you built bridges. Eliza had built bridges. Between herself and Creed, between herself and the town, between the life she'd lost and the life she was creating. And those bridges had held, even when the weight seemed impossible. Spring came again, as it always did, and with it came news that Morrison was reopening the Mercantile in its original location, rebuilt bigger and better than before. He asked Creed to help with the construction, offering wages that were more than fair. You should take it, Eliza said when Creed asked her opinion. It means being gone during the day, leaving you to handle things here. I can handle it, and we could use the money. Could also use my labor here. We'll manage. Besides, it'll be good for you. Good for us. Showing the town that we're part of it, not separate from it. So Creed took the job, and Eliza managed the homestead with Samuel's help. It was hard work, but no harder than what she'd done alone the previous year. And now she had a partner to come home to, someone to share the load with even when they weren't physically side by side. The Mercantile went up over the course of 6 weeks, and Creed came home each night with stories about the town, about people who were starting to accept them, about opportunities he was hearing about for work or trade. They were becoming part of the fabric of Bitter Creek, no longer outsiders, but neighbors. When the Mercantile opened in June, Morrison made a point of thanking Creed publicly, praising his work ethic and skill. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Acceptance, finally, after a year of judgment and suspicion. That summer, Eliza found out she was pregnant. She'd suspected for weeks but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. When she finally told Creed, his face went through a dozen expressions in as many seconds: shock, fear, joy, terror, wonder. Are you sure? Pretty sure. How do you feel about it? Terrified, excited, overwhelmed, all of it at once. Me too. They sat together in the gathering dusk, hands clasped, facing a future that had just expanded in ways neither of them had anticipated. A baby, a new life, a symbol of everything they'd built together. What are we going to tell Samuel? Creed asked finally. The truth, that he's going to be a big brother, that our family is growing, that love multiplies, it doesn't divide. They told him the next morning, and Samuel's reaction was everything Eliza could have hoped for. Pure, unfiltered joy. He was going to be a big brother. He was going to have someone to teach things to protect, to share his life with. "Can I name it?" he asked immediately. "We'll all decide together," Eliza said, smiling. As a family, the pregnancy was easier than Samuel's had been, maybe because Eliza wasn't trying to do everything alone this time. Creed took over the heavy work without being asked. Samuel helped with the chickens and garden, and Eliza let herself rest when she needed to without feeling guilty about it. The town rallied in unexpected ways. Mrs. Henderson brought by baby clothes her grandchildren had outgrown. Other women offered advice and support, and even Mrs. Hartwell managed a stiff congratulations when they crossed paths at the mercantile. In February, during a brief warm spell that felt like a gift, Eliza went into labor. Creed rode for the midwife, while Samuel stayed with her, holding her hand and trying to be brave, even though he was clearly terrified. "It's going to be okay," Eliza told him between contractions. "Women do this every day. But it hurts you." "It does. But it's worth it. You were worth it, and this baby will be worth it too." The birth was long and hard, but no worse than Samuel's had been. And when the midwife finally placed a screaming, red-faced baby girl in her arms, Eliza felt something complete itself inside her. This was her family. Thomas's son, Creed's daughter, and herself, holding it all together through sheer stubborn will and love that had been earned rather than assumed. They named her Clara, after Creed's mother. Samuel was entranced, hovering over his baby sister with a protectiveness that was almost comical. Creed looked terrified every time he held her, like she might break if he breathed wrong. "She's tougher than she looks," Eliza assured him. "She's tiny. She'll grow. They do that." "I know, it's just—" He paused, looking down at the infant in his arms with wonder. "I never thought I'd have this. A family, a home, people who need me to stay. You have it now, all of it." "Yeah, I do." Spring arrived with Clara barely 2 months old, and the homestead burst into life. The garden they planted was twice the size of the previous years. The cattle herd had grown by 2 calves, and Samuel had started talking about maybe wanting to learn to read better so he could help keep records of everything. They were building something lasting. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and solid and theirs. A life carved out of hardship and held together by choices made daily to stay, to work, to love, despite the difficulty. One evening in late April, after the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Eliza and Creed sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Staying here instead of moving on?" "Never. Not even when it's hard. Especially not when it's hard. Hard means it matters." That's a strange way to think about it. Maybe, but it's true. The things that come easy don't stick. The things you have to fight for, that you choose over and over even when choosing hurts, those are the things that become part of who you are. Eliza leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "I love you. I love you too. Both of you. All 3 of you, actually. This whole messy, imperfect, beautiful life we've built." "It is beautiful, isn't it?" "Yeah, it really is." They sat there as darkness fell and the stars came out. 2 people who'd found each other when they'd both needed finding, building something together that neither could have built alone. And Eliza thought about that first day, when a stranger had stepped forward in the mercantile and offered her dignity instead of charity. How that single choice had changed everything. How choosing to accept had been the hardest and best decision she'd ever made. Because that was the thing about survival. It was never just about making it through. It was about who you let yourself become while you were making it through. Whether you stayed closed off or whether you let people in, whether you held on to hurt or whether you chose forgiveness, whether you settled for existing or whether you fought for something more. Eliza had fought, had let someone in, had chosen to build instead of just survive, and that choice had made all the difference. Years later, when Samuel was grown and Clara was learning to read, and the homestead was prosperous beyond anything Eliza had imagined that first desperate winter, people would ask her about it. About how she'd survived losing her husband, about how she'd built a new life from nothing, about what advice she'd give to others facing similar struggles. And Eliza would think about that day at the mercantile, about the stranger who became her husband, about all the choices that had led from there to here. And she'd say the only thing that felt true, accept help when it's offered honestly, trust carefully but completely when trust is earned, and remember that survival isn't the same as living. One is about making it through another day. The other is about building days worth making it through. Choose living, even when it's harder, especially when it's harder, because that's where the real life happens. It wasn't poetic or profound or the kind of wisdom that sounded good in stories, but it was real, and it was hers, and it had been learned through experience rather than imagination. And in the end, that was worth more than any pretty words could ever be. The homestead stood strong through seasons and years, weathering storms and droughts, and all the challenges the Wyoming frontier could throw at it. And inside it lived a family built not from blood alone, but from choice, from work, from the daily decision to stay and build in love, even when it would have been easier to walk away. That was the real triumph. Not the survival, though that mattered, not the prosperity, though that helped, but the choosing, the staying, the building of something that lasted because people decided it was worth lasting for. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.